funeral organizers of Reddit, what are the weirdest or most unique funerals you have organized? Best non-tragic one for me. Pallbearers so drunk they could barely stand, let alone carry the casket. They agreed to wheel out on a trolley. Some still holding their goon sacks, bladders used in box wine for you non-Aussies, in their free hand. Something about your mentioning not being able to carry the casket reminded me of my grandmother's funeral. She had been in denial about her imminent death right up to the very end, and had refused to plan her funeral or talk about it at all, with anyone. Since we had a lot of family across the country and out of the country, when she died my grandpa decided to bury her quickly and informally, and have a long beautiful memorial service for her once everyone could get here. So at the informal burial, we had no service or anything, just met at the graveyard and watched her casket be buried. There was a little confusion about getting the casket from the hearse to the grave-digging truck, only my dad, brother and husband were strong enough to do it, meaning we were going to have to impose on the hearse driver and the grave-digger to help us. Looking around, wondering in the moment who else could help, my dad beckoned my grandpa over to carry a side of the casket. My 89-year-old grandpa. I looked at my dad like he was crazy, but my grandpa stepped forward like he was maybe going to try. In that moment I realized my dad saw my grandpa very differently than I did. I saw him as a frail old man, which he is. My dad saw him as, well, Dad. Strong, capable, that larger-than-life persona of what a man should be. My dad just had no idea how frail his father had become. Because in his mind, he was and always will be Dad, and everything that comes with that word. I've been in the funeral industry for over 10 years now, and most services I have arranged have been run-of-the-mill. Most people seem to want similar things, but one service will always stand out to me. A family asked us to play some hardcore gangster rap for their mother/grandmother at her service, and we happily obliged. I can't quite remember the name of the song, but it had heavy themes of murder, drug use and pretty foul language. Her service was then finished with a recital of the Lord's Prayer. This lady was in her late 80s. When my grandfather died, we had a request we were afraid was odd, but the funeral director told us he'd seen much stranger, so it was okay. My grandfather was big into motorcycles. He had Harleys as long as I can remember, and even after he had his hip surgery and the doctor told him not to ride anymore, he retooled his bike into a trike so he could still ride. So after he died, my uncle outfitted the trike with a special rig, very secure and very safe, so that we could take him to the cemetery in his coffin on the back of the motorcycle. My uncle drove the motorcycle while all the members of my grandfather's riding club circled him from the funeral parlor to the cemetery. It was badass and awesome, and I know my grandfather would have loved it. We did kind of the same with my father's funeral. Our family has always been into motorcycles, with for example me visiting my first MotoGP race while I was about a month old. My siblings and I practically grew up in the sidecar of my father's Kawasaki, which we still have. So when my father died, instead of a hearse, we arranged a motorcycle with a sidecar platform for the coffin. The funeral director is also a biker, so he was leading the procession on his gold wing. Behind him was the sidecar with the coffin, and behind that were me and some friends, family and colleagues of my father on our own motorcycles, although I had a rental, because mine was totaled a few months earlier and I was still rebuilding it. Behind that the normal procession followed. Because of that, the music at the funeral, rock/blues/metal, our request to not send/bring flowers but donate that money to a cause that was close to my father's heart, and the vast amount of people attending. The funeral director usually tells about my father's funeral to show people what is possible and that they don't have to follow all of the usual funeral routines if they don't want to. As a funeral music planner and organist, I've worked with families on many funerals to honor special requests. One was a Wizard of Oz themed funeral, where the deceased woman had loved the original movie and requested that music from it be used. Pallbearers and friends of the family dressed in costumes of the principal characters as they entered the church, including dozens of munchkins, Toto and the Witch. There wasn't a dry eye after the eulogy when the soloist sang Over the Rainbow, but many smiles as the coffin was carried out of the church en route to the cemetery as everyone sang We're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz. Not a funeral organizer, but one of my sisters was killed by a drunk driver, so as a family we were trying to figure out what to do for her funeral/memorial. She was cremated, so we had a lovely memorial at my dad's place outside, and planted a couple of trees for her. My sister had a big personality in life and she loved to have fun and make people laugh. My other sisters and I decided that rather than wear black, we would wear the most outrageous ball gowns we could get our hands on. Mine ended up being black with peacock feathers embroidered all over. One of my other sisters wore an enormous orange tutu. She would have absolutely loved it. It helped make the day a little less bitter and a little more sweet. A Viking funeral. Putting the ashes of the deceased out to sea in a little boat fashioned out of salt and covered with dry flowers/kindling. Fashioning biodegradable arrows with flaming tips. Everyone shot flaming arrows at the boat and it caught fire, then dissolved into the sea. Now, to be clear, Vikings never did any of this, but Hollywood gave people ideas. Apparently I am not the first, but it was cool. Put the fun back in funeral. I once went to a funeral of a young person who died from a terminal illness and had planned her own funeral. She had a white coffin and at the graveside everyone took turns to sigh the coffin/write messages in colored marker pens. It was pretty touching. I'm not a funeral director, but a few years ago when my grandmother died, miss you Granny, my 2 sisters and 2 cousins were preparing her body for the viewing, as they were all cosmetologists. I should say that my family has a bit of a strange sense of humor. And for anyone that says this might be disrespectful, my granny would have laughed her ass off at this. So anyway, they are putting on all her makeup and they are playfully arguing over how it should be done. Eventually, this escalated in them comparing their own makeup to what they were doing for Granny. They were joking about who did a better job, and to get an accurate depiction, they were lying down next to the coffin, closing their eyes and folding their arms on their chest, and the others would compare. They would then adjust both their own makeup and Granny's to get it right. It was at this point that the funeral director walked in. He opened the door, saw my cousin lying on the floor as though she was dead, with the others giddily adjusting Granny's makeup and using my dead cousin as a reference. There was an awkward pause for a few seconds before the girls all burst into laughter. The funeral director was visibly uncomfortable and silently left. After all was said and done, they went to apologize to the director, admitting that they were just having a bit of fun. He said it was alright, just a bit strange. He admitted that he did chuckle a bit as he was walking away. Fast forward to the service, a family friend was giving a eulogy and the girls are looking at Granny up front in the coffin. They are trying to hold back smirks to each other, and a few people are noticing. They look to the back of the room, where the funeral director is standing. He flashes them a smirk himself, then closes his eyes and pulls his hands to chest to imitate a dead person in a coffin. My family have that same wicked sense of humor. When we did our final viewing before my mom's funeral, we took a group selfie with the coffin because we would always take a group photo together on the last days of our holidays together. The funeral guys were very professional and didn't take offense to our laughing all the way through the service, and on the return journey, we decided to splash out and get the hearse to drive us back to the pub for the wake instead of making our own way home. We were going down the motorway and everyone was silent, and my partner suddenly goes, "Excuse me mate, how fast can this thing go?" And the driver nodded and silently sped the hearse up to something like 100 miles per hour. I would pay good money to have heard the conversations in other cars when they were overtaken by a hearse full of cackling people bombing down a motorway at 100 miles per hour. The piecemeal burials. My dad was a funeral director in a small town. One day, a guy called and said, "I'm going to be dropping off my foot this afternoon." He was like, "What?" The guy was diabetic and had to get his foot amputated. He had already purchased a burial plot in a local cemetery, and wanted his foot to be buried there with the rest of him to follow eventually. Sure enough, The guy came in a wheelchair with a bug bundle containing his foot. He insisted that my dad embalm it. So, he did. It was then buried in his plot. About a year later, the guy calls up again. "I'm going to be bringing over my leg, I need you to embalm it and have it buried." Apparently his diabetes had continued to progress, and they had to amputate the leg opposite of the one that was missing its foot. So, my dad dutifully embalmed it and arranged for it to be buried. About another year or so goes by, and the man finally dies. My dad embalmed him and saw to it that he was buried with the rest of the parts which preceded him in death. Former funeral director. Usually ran the back of the house but met with families on a few occasions. Met with the parents of a 16-year-old girl who had died in a car crash. Arrangements were tough at first because how could they not be? We got the official stuff out of the way and then talked about what she, the deceased, would have wanted. Ended up rearranging the funeral home so that the lobby had crockpots of boiled peanuts and a lounge with the Lion King playing. Inside the main parlor was a purple-themed dance party. The pinnacle of the evening was the girl's mom leading everyone in doing the wiggle. It was amazing, and I am still floored by this family for being able to really celebrate their daughter's life in this way. I sang in a community choir with a man who was diagnosed with terminal cancer. This choir performed Handel's Messiah every year, and this man was our bass soloist on The People That Walked in Darkness Have Seen a Great Light. So, even though this choir didn't normally sing at church services, his dying request was that we come to his church for the funeral. The minister's text was The People That Walked, and we were told to sing all his favorite hymns. While we were tearfully warming up on the day of, the choir director said, he didn't specifically request it, but what if after the recessional, we surprised everyone by breaking into the Hallelujah chorus, as a reminder that we'll all be together again someday? So we did. We finished the requested recessional while the pallbearers were recessing, and then burst into Hallelujah before the mourners left. Not a dry eye in the house. I am not a funeral organizer but a control engineer. During a project I worked with a guy who did the crematorium oven systems and he had some good stories. Story 1, a young guy died in a diving accident. His friends and family wanted him to be cremated in his diving suit. The crematorium guys told them they could not do this, but did not tell the reason. So the family decided to sneakily put his diving suit underneath his normal clothing, to give their loved one a proper farewell. So, the core goes into the oven. The neoprene suit catches fire, and if you have ever seen a car tire fire you know what comes next. Picture the scene, a lovely bit of countryside with lush green fields, birds tweeting, elegant crematorium in the center, with huge black billowing clouds of smoke coming out of the chimney, to be seen and smelled all over the area. Whoops. The next obvious one is the sneaking of bottles of expensive whiskey in the pockets of the deceased, popular with the Indian population. I won't have to tell you that the combination of an 800°C oven and a bottle of 40% volume booze is an exciting one. Best one was the story of the eco-friendly coffin. This crematorium had a system where the coffin during the ceremony would be lifted with two metal forks, the oven door opened, coffin gets inserted in the oven, door closes halfway, forks retract and the coffin, pressing against the door stays in the oven, and finally the door closes completely. Well, this system is perfect for wooden coffins, but this guy was into his environment etc. and had an eco-friendly coffin made of some type of recycled cardboard. The forks lift, the oven door opens, the forks slide in, the coffin disintegrates instantaneously when it meets the intense heat of the oven, the door lowers half, the forks retreat, taking the body back outside of the oven. Family and friends are distraught. Staff try with broomsticks to push the corpse back in the oven. Total chaos ensues. Obligatory not a funeral director. A co-worker's father passed away. As I was getting to where he was laid out I heard the voices of Jack Fleming and Myron Cope calling Super Bowl IX, and I was immediately confused. I get to the main room of the funeral home and my co-worker's father is laid out not in a suit, but as if he were ready for a Sunday afternoon of Steeler football. There was a TV on showing their first Super Bowl win, and all kinds of football memorabilia around. My co-worker said they wanted to lay his father out as they truly remembered him. First time I ever saw something like that at a funeral. Not a funeral director, but when my great-uncle passed away, his last request was to have his ashes scattered on the same mountain my grandpa is scattered on. The way he wanted it done though is the weird part. He wanted his ashes put in a plastic bag, hung in a large pine tree, and then have everyone shoot it open with shotguns. Only 3 family members actually shot, but 3 shotgun blasts simultaneously shredding a plastic bag full of human ashes. Pretty wild. Kinda like one of those gender reveal balloons. My great-uncle was a weird man. Please, like this video and comment your thoughts. If you like this channel, please, subscribe for more Reddit content you can listen on a go.